Hello and a very good morning. Welcome to the second day of the Conference on Institutions in Public Policy. For today's session on education as public good, our invited chair is Professor Shyam Menon. Professor Shyam Menon is a distinguished practitioner of institutional development and renewal at higher education. We invite you to the stage, sir. And the invited speaker for today's session is Professor Rohit Dhankar. Professor Dhankar is also the founder and secretary of Digantar, Jaipur, and he's professor in Azim Premji University. He has been part of many initiatives in developing material and curriculum through various committees and collaborative efforts across the country. Rohit ji has been part of many NCERT initiatives in developing material and curriculum through various committees. He was an integral part of the National Curriculum Framework 2005 process as a member of National Steering Committee, Drafting Committee, and chair of Focus Group on Curriculum, Syllabus, and Textbook. We welcome you on the stage, sir. The session is all yours.
Yes. My sense is that even if the mic doesn't work, it's okay, but it gives a sense of dignity when you hold something like this. Thank you for asking me to be here and facilitate Rohit's much-awaited presentation. Usually, being a chair is like a task of catching a cloud and pinning it down. But in the case of Rohit, he is already pinned down by the by the structures of rationality which he is so wedded to. So I would certainly count on that, and all I have to do is to be on the ring side and be your cheerleader. Thank you. We thought that we have 1 hour. Because 11:30 is the time. If you want more discussion, then you have to shorten your. If you want no discussion, then you can speak all the way.
Good morning, friends. I have taken the chair's permission to present sitting here. Perhaps I'll get tired if I stand there. Also, I'll speak for about 40 minutes. I'll try to cut it short, but those promises I always forget. Still.
So we'll lose out the opportunity of discussion.
Yeah. So I'm very thankful to Jyotsna for providing me with this opportunity to listen to very thoughtful and rich presentations. I do believe that at the present juncture of our democracy, these discussions are very pertinent. I also got personally benefited. These days my mind is rather sleepy, and these discussions triggered at least 2 articles of my kind. They are not research articles. Usually I write speculative pieces, so I think that is my personal gain in this. Now, for education, I have been talking a lot on education, but talking about education as a public good is somewhat odd for me. I come more from the tradition of education as a necessity for becoming a good human being and rights perspective. But I think this gives me an opportunity to explore interrelationships between 2 ways of looking at education and its need in the society. Therefore, I welcome it. As a preliminary, I would like to explain that I am taking a particular view of education. And I'll discuss mostly intentional education organized through institutional structures or institutional settings. Because I don't want to go into the debate of the larger idea of education in which incidental learning just by living in the society is also education, because that you cannot make a public, either it is already a public good, and if it is not, the part of it which is not, you can never do. Also, that is not much use in planning education and curriculum and pedagogy, apart from some tangential uses as a background. Therefore, I'll focus on intentional education organized through institutions. There are at least three strands to this way of looking at education. One obviously is a system of institutions, the second is processes and practices, and the third is achievement of a desired state of mind in the learner or educatee, the person who is being educated. One doesn't need to explain much about the first one. We all know all the departments of education, ministries of education, institutions, central and state, etc., form the part of institutional setup, actually, institutional system. Personally, I feel that that is actually a kind of infrastructure for doing what is real education, that is necessary, but actually that is not the crux of education. The second is the processes and practices. By that I mean exactly what is going in the classrooms, be that school classrooms or university classrooms, the interaction between the teacher, the student, and the content of education, what is to be learned, achieved, etc. That is a very important aspect of education, but that is also a way of doing education. And I would say the crux of education is actually the achievement of a desired state of mind. So basically speaking, overwhelmingly, education is an achievement concept in which we have a certain kind of desired results which we think or we strive that our learners will achieve. I'll focus on this and in the further discussion. Now, coming to public good, one, by the way, I am taking public good as a kind of tentative understanding. I am new to this area, and just good enough which the philosophers of education use in their analysis. This may not be a kind of perfect analysis in terms of the economist's understanding. So this is coming more from that side. One definition seems to be a good which is non-rivalrous and non-excludable is a public good, or could be a good which is non-rivalrous, I'll explain that, and non-excludable can be termed as a public good. I'll explain this, but at the same time I'll add a good which is first let me explain. Non-rivalrous means by utilizing or using that good by me, it does not affect your capability or your possibility of using that good. So this is non-rivalrous in this manner. Non-excludable means that you cannot draw a fence around it to exclude anyone. Say air. So I'm breathing in this room, okay, I'm a smoker and it may have some impact on your health, but generally speaking, this doesn't bother even Shyam much. By my breathing, it's actually air which is available to him is still available. At the same time, you cannot draw a fence around me to stop me from breathing air. So therefore, air in this sense is a public good. So that's what basically this definition means. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but that's. But I would add that only those goods of this nature which contribute something positive to the general well-being of the society could be called public goods. I'm bringing an ethical point here, and I am not certain how economists would respond to that, but something which is available to everyone cannot be drawn fence around, and something which is very bad for the public or well-being of the society, I would be very, very hesitant to call it a public good. So, now, if we pursue this example a little bit further, and we take the availability of air, say in Delhi, particularly during the winter, and availability of air in my remote village in Rajasthan, and availability of air in, say, Nainital, up in the mountains. And all these are Indian citizens, but the quality of air available to them, in spite of air being a public good, is uneven. I do not know whether any state or anything can do at this level. We will come to some other examples in which something could be done. So, it seems that here the public good is, the air is a public good, but the availability of quality is uneven. Now imagine some rich people in Delhi who buy a gadget which is called air purifier and keep in their room. So actually now they have carved out a little private good out of this public good. And that is not public good because that gadget cannot be bought by everyone. So it has restrictions on people, though it may not be, though it still may be non-rivalrous, but this now becomes excludable. Excludable. So that is one definition. There is another definition which I like better, and very quickly I'll share that also with you before we go any further. That changes the words a little bit. It says a public good is one that satisfies the basic availability condition and the open access to and the open access condition. So two conditions. Basic availability condition, which is very akin to non-rivals in the sense that whatever quantity of something is needed or considered to be basic necessity is available to everyone without hindering availability to anyone else. And the second says that one, it doesn't depend on the capability to pay. So this is actually has open access to everyone who require and attempt to acquire it. I would use this definition because the phrasing seems to be a little bit more amenable to educational discourse in this. Before going to education, I would also consider, by the way, now most of the economic analysis I saw around it in about who would pay, etc. It seems that one cannot make a very tight logic that there could be certain goods which could be, which necessarily have to be on the economic grounds, purely on the cost, benefit, etc. grounds. Also, people have doubts about the ethical grounds, and they cast doubts that this may not be even ethical for the government to coerce some people to pay for availability of public goods to everyone else. There are several problems. I am not going into details of that because of the lack of time, but this is the problem of free riders and several other contradictions, etc. I'm leaving that out. But I would go a little bit further or with our example, because that would be useful to me a little later in the educational discourse. Now, if we take an example of availability of water, at one time in the villages of Rajasthan, you can say the water was a public good basically through two means. One is public wells, which somehow were dug by the community or sometimes aided by the state, but mostly organized by the community, and rainwater collected. So through these two mechanisms, it was a public good. Now, when the irrigation started and electrification and tube wells, etc. came, the water table receded to something about 1,000 feet. And the water which was available to everyone in their, they could, if they could manage to dig a well in their field, was available to them. It is not available now, and cost has increased much more. Also, in certain areas, no water at all. You don't hit a water table at all. So it has now become, in that sense, a private good. And the people who have water in their fields actually fill tankers and sell it. So something which was already a public good has become private good because of the environmental changes mostly brought out by human activity. Now, let's go to the next step. Now, the state government tries to fill tankers and send to every village maybe twice or thrice a week so that every villager can store water at least for drinking and cooking purposes enough every week. Now they are trying to meet this basic availability condition, and this is free, therefore open access. So water going from public goods to private good, and now through the government and administrative efforts again trying to become a public good. So this cycle can happen in anything. Why did I spend time on this? Because I want to state a few assumptions which I believe that given time I could argue very rigorously, but here I only state them. Why does the government try to make this water, drinking water, a public good? Let's imagine a smaller society, not because imagining India, which is about 1/5 of the humanity, is very, very difficult. Let's imagine a smaller society. And I will state some assumptions which later on you can question. I would say that societies are groups of people who define themselves as its members. The membership is based on shared values, experiences, traditions, aspirations, and visions of good human life. Now societies become, within quote, self-conscious in a way. They are not creatures who can become self-conscious, but societies develop their own kind of images through the members in them, so to speak, and want to perpetuate their existence. This, I believe, most of the social scientists would agree that the social formations have a tendency to perpetuate their existence. But their existence depends on the members, and thus at least an optimum number of members is necessary for a society to exist. Now, drinking water is essential for the lives of the members, and therefore it seems that societies might have an interest in making drinking water a public good. We will use this example. I'll add one more assumption, that unhygienic drinking water actually will take a toll on the people's health, and therefore contribution to the well-being of society and contribution to the prosperity of the society through its members, as well as the stability of the society, will be in danger. Therefore, maybe society is interested also in providing hygienic drinking water. We will keep these ideas and these assumptions in our mind, and now we will go to education. Okay, so education as a public good. First, let's begin a little bit more looking at education. What is the notion of education I have in mind? And for that, I'll take help from a very well-known philosopher of education, Israel Scheffler. And we will explore the relationship between region, freedom, human dignity, and education through this little passage. Scheffler writes that region stands always in contrast with inconsistency and expediency, which means that region is something which maintains consistency and does not waver with various kinds of expediencies. He says, in the judgment of particular issue, that's what reason does in a judgment. In the cognitive realm, reason is a kind of justice to the evidence, a fair treatment of merits of the case in the interest of truth. So, the ideal for reason in the cognitive realm is truth and fair treatment of all the available evidence. In the moral realm, Reason is action on principle. So there have to be some principles. Action which therefore does not bend with the wind, nor lean to the side of advantage, or in the side of the power out of weakness, or in the self-interest. So there have to be some grounds on which the judgment is arrived, and those grounds are ideally unaffected by my personal interest, by fear of the authority, or by these kinds of considerations. Whether in the cognitive or moral realm, reason is always a matter of treating equal reasons equally. Therefore, in Scheffler's definition of reason, equality is built already into it. Actually, he is drawing on Kant, where equality is a necessary part of human reason. And judging the issues in the light of the general principles in which, to which one has bound oneself. Now, this last point is important, particularly, we will come to education, but this is important, and Shyam repeats it. In thus binding myself to a set of principles, I act freely. Sounds contradictory, but I bind myself with a set of principles which are unwavering, stick to it, that is my freedom, and that is my dignity as a human being. As I said, definition is taken from Kant. But compare it with we Indians, when we became free, we said we give ourselves this constitution. What are we doing? Actually, we are binding ourselves with a set of principles. Each one of us has to do this act of giving a constitution or to ourselves at a minuscule scale, our own moral code. That's then only, according to Shyam and some other philosophers of education, you become free, and then only you acquire the true meaning of human dignity. Now, I would add that be it in the case of the person or an institution, this is what autonomy means. Autonomy is not any which action. Autonomy is always a judgment arrived at on the basis of some principles. Now, Shyam goes on that rationality, and this is again important, rationality is an essential aspect of human dignity. And the rational goal of humanity is to construct a society in which such dignity can flower. A society of order, a society so ordered as to adjudicate rationally the affairs of free rational agents. So, rational judgment as well as each agent is free. An international and democratic republic. And the last line, the job of education is to develop character in the broadest sense, that is, principles, thought and action in which dignity of man is manifest. This is the state of mind which I mentioned in the beginning, we should strive to achieve for our learners and for the educatee. That's why I quoted this passage. Is Shyam alone in thinking this manner? No. First, as I already reminded you, this is our condition, achievement condition of education. This is what crux of the education is. Now, why such an education should be a public good? It's okay. One can have an idealistic definition of education, but why? Why it is required to be a public good? I do not know how strong this argument is, but it came to my mind that at the level of humanity, there seems to be already a reasonably sound argument. If we borrow from Kant and go by his categorical imperative, one particular formulation, which he calls humanitarian formulation, that goes, so act that you use humanity, whether in your person or someone else, always as as an end in itself and never only as a means to your ends, which simply put means don't use humans for your own purposes, don't use even yourself for your own emotional purposes. From this, Kant derives through a simple argument. I don't have time to go into that, but he derives from this that this is our duty as human beings to develop our own talents. Otherwise, we are actually wasting our humanity and we are not respecting the dignity of human being. Which means that each one of us is duty bound to develop our own talents. Try to remember the directive principle that we as Indians have a duty to develop scientific temper. This comes very close. Kantian is broader and more firmly rooted into the philosophical argumentation. But how can we develop our talents? Unless until education is available to us, the opportunity to develop our talents and our capabilities are freely, unhindered, available to us, we cannot do that. Therefore, right from the idea of being human, it seems that education of a certain kind should be available to everyone through some mechanism or other. Obviously, today I am not going to talk about mechanism at all. Now, let's go to the final stage where we can talk about the society, democracy, and education together. That was broader at the humanitarian level. So, we all, as humans, develop a self-image. That is part of being self-conscious, or part of being human. All societies are composed of these self-conscious rational beings. And these beings together with themselves also develop a vision of a desirable society. It seems to me that the most popular vision of a desirable society world over today is a democratic society. So when we talk of preserving a society, we are not talking of preserving any which kind of barbaric society. We actually are making it more or less a precondition of a certain society in which equality, freedom, justice, dignity of human beings are. So that is the kind of society that have become fused with the very definition of society, it seems to me. As far as India is concerned, I do believe that we are heatedly debating this very point at this moment. Now, what are the conditions, what are the kinds of people who can sustain a democratic society? I'll talk about 3 or 4 different things which point to the same thing. One basic assumption about the democratic people in the democratic society is stated in very simple terms by Patricia White, and I like this formulation particularly. She says that we are imagining that these choice-making human beings in the society are moderately rational. She is not saying they are absolutely rational. They are moderately rational, moderately benevolent. They are not the people who do not like other people and want to harm them. But they don't go out of their way and may not actually harm themselves to benefit others. I do not know about that. That might be a moral idea. That may not be a necessity for a democratic society. But moderate benevolence seems to be a necessity for a democratic society. And they have a moderate strength of will, which means that whatever judgment they arrive at, this would require effort, and they are ready to take the pains to make it realize in the real life, as well as they have the self-restraint to be guided by their moderate rationality. So these are the 3 conditions, she says, that people in democratic society we are assuming. Because in democratic society, we all have to make certain kinds of judgments for favoring or critiquing or opposing certain kinds of decisions of the powers that be. And therefore, for a rational discourse and participating in the democratic process, they seem to be necessary. There is nothing new in this. Actually, Mudaliar Commission, in the very beginning of our democratic journey, wrote, and I quote, "Citizenship in a democracy is very exacting and challenging responsibility for which every citizen had to be carefully trained. It involves many intellectual, social, and moral qualities which cannot be expected to grow of their own accord." Now, intellectual capability, rationality, moral, benevolence, social, etc., regulating my own behavior, etc. Not exactly the same terms, but it seems that one can talk about when detailing, one is likely to find a large overlap. Now coming back, Scheffler to again, and you will be surprised how Scheffler echoes. I'm not saying deliberately he had read Mudaliar, because Mudaliar Commission was earlier, but how rational minds think alike, as a joke. Anyway, a society committed to the democratic ideal is one that makes peculiarly difficult and challenging demands on its members. That's precisely what Mudaliar is saying. It accordingly also makes stringent demands on those processes through which its members are educated. So therefore, there has to be some kind of program, carefully thought out program to develop that. And if we want to give the final... Yeah, I'll stop in 10 minutes. Thank you, Shyam. Now, maybe we can give the last word to an Indian on this issue and then come back to Mudaliar Commission. And this is particularly important, what I'm going to quote just now at this juncture of our society. This is prophetic to me. I do not know. You can make your own judgment. I quote, "A democracy of people who can think only confusedly and can neither make progress nor even maintain itself, because it will always be open to the risk of being misled and exploited by demagogues who have within their reach today unprecedentedly powerful media of mass communication." Compare the Mudaliar Commission in 1952. Compare the power of the mass media in 1952 and today. And Mudaliar Commission is worried that if we do not know how to think carefully, then demagogues will hijack our minds and make us think what they like. Now, through mass communication and propaganda. To be effective, a democratic citizen should have the understanding and the intellectual integrity to sift truth from falsehood, facts from propaganda, and to reject the dangerous appeal of fanaticism and prejudice. Sounds absolutely prophetic to me. I think that we were warned that this might happen to us, and this is happening to us now. So, coming back, they all hint towards that very, very softly articulated moderate rationality, moderate benevolence, and moderate strength of will to guide or self-control, guide my own conduct. Now the thing is, that is what a person is assumed to be in democracy. A democratic society cannot exist unless a good majority of members fulfill these conditions. And these qualities are not inborn in humans. The only avenue for humans is to develop these qualities through education. Therefore, it seems to me that the basic availability and open access of opportunity to develop these qualities is absolutely necessary for the very existence of the society as a democratic society. And therefore, it should be a public good in these very terms. It seems to me that our biggest problem today is that we are falling below the critical line in this moderate rationality, benevolence, and self-restraint. And what could be done, I do not know. I'm more of a thinking about education and doing small things in one school. Systemic changes, etc., is Varghese, Shyam, Jyotsna, and these people's avenue. May I conclude with the last 3 mantras of Rig Veda. You might be very surprised that I am jumping back to 3,000 years after this discourse on Mudaliar and Shefla. But please listen to this, and also listen to my interpretation then later on. These last 3 lines, the three mantras in Rig Veda say, come together, speak together, together let your thoughts agree, just as the gods of long ago, coming to an agreement together, reverently approach their sacrificial portion. Common to them all is the solemn utterance, common the assembly, common their thoughts along with their perceptions. I hereby utter an utterance common to you all on your behalf, with an oblation common to you all I offer on your behalf. And the last line, common in your purpose, common your hearts, let your thoughts be common so that it will go well for you all together. Now, replace the gods and oblations, etc., with whatever we have in society and for ourselves and produce through our cooperation. And rather than making it a prayer, let us achieve this common goal through open, rational deliberation. The idea of the society moving and having an agreement among all its people is old. Maybe they were thinking through different means. Today we have the rational apparatus with us to strive for this. Personally, I feel, friends, that what we need in the majority of Indian citizens today is a large, good heart, guided strictly by a rational mind, and unwavering commitment to truth. And that we cannot achieve unless we make education freely available to every citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rohit, for sticking strictly to your time limit that you yourself had set. And I always used to feel that, listening to philosophers, particularly analytical school, it's like listening to a presentation, listening to a geometric, formulation. It has a certain architecture in that argument, in the sense series of arguments based on postulates and implications, and then riders and so on. So it was such a pleasure listening to you. Without much ado, and I would like to throw this open to, but to begin with, maybe since he invoked you as a systemic person, Varghese, we can't let him down. He deals with one school and you have to deal with the system. Yeah.
And also Prof. Dhankar. It was nice listening to you. I'll take a very... I'll take a very traditional view before coming to the most important things that you mentioned. See, there are 2 issues. If you look at from an economics perspective or a social scientist perspective on education, how much we should spend on education or invest on education, and how should we share the cost of education. These are the two issues. When we consider whether education is a public good or a private good, etc., essentially, these are the two issues. And more importantly, it is not education which is a public good. In 1954-56, when this public good was defined, it was knowledge was considered as a public good, not education. Even when knowledge is a public good, knowledge producing institutions need not be public goods. That is the difference between schools, universities, colleges, and the knowledge that is being produced. So for example, you produce a research evidence. That evidence that you produce, the research result is a public good. But on the other hand, a university or a department or an institution is producing the knowledge good, they invest a lot of money. Need not be the public, it can be the private. So there is a difference between knowledge which is a public good and the process of knowledge production which involves institutions, and institutions may not be a private public good, you know. So that is why, as Rohit started with by saying that non-excludability and non-rivalrous, these are two characteristics which are defined by the Nobel laureate in 1957-58. Not that when he got, at that time he got Nobel Prize, because Nobel Prizes in economics were introduced only in 1969. So that is something very different that is to be noted. That's one point. What does it mean? It means that the accepted theory and definition of spending on education, who should spend on education, is that at lower levels of economic development, the state should spend on education, and at higher levels of education, it may be the state and the households. This is generally the norm that is accepted, and you find that this is the trend that you find in most cases. The only exception that is brought by the distortion, is as a distortion by the marketer, is that in the developed countries, even today, nearly 80% of the educational expenditure is borne by the state. I'm talking about whole educational expenditure, not higher education, school education. In the OECD, what we call as the OECD countries. Whereas in the developing and less developed countries, you find that market is more prominent. I have a hypothesis, which I have developed much earlier, which states that in the matured market economies and in the less matured market economies, what is the trend that you find? Higher education is massified or universalized in the matured market economies through public institutions. Whereas in the less developed market economies and less matured market economies, higher education is massified and universalized through the private institutions. If you see India, the empirical evidence, when public sector was dominant, in the first 50 years of planned development, we had only an enrollment ratio of 8.3 and a total enrollment of 8.4 million. But in the next, when the private sector entered in a big way with markets, within 18 years or 17 years, what you find is that the enrollment increased from 8.4 million to 40 million. And you also find that it is not, GR also increased from 8.3 to around 27 to 28%. So a fast increase that is taking place. What is happening is that what we considered as a public good has become a private good, and depending upon the availability of resources within the household, people try to make it as a private good and try to maximize their investment in that. That means the priority changed, investment changed, and the returns to education changed, which acted as an important dimension. So for example, in the public sector, when you talk about how much we should spend, this is based on 3 criteria. What is considered to be social demand criteria, and what is considered to be cost-benefit analysis, and also what is considered to be manpower analysis. Sorry for using the word manpower. Now if I use manpower, our women colleagues will be shouting, but that is a technical terminology that is used. So nowadays it is shifted to human resource approach to development. These are the 3 ways, but I don't want to get into the details. But essentially what is happening today is that public sector investment, 1968 policy, we said that we should spend 6%. 86 policy repeated that. 2020 policy also repeated that. But what has happened is that no change that has taken place. It was 3%, it has become 4% or 3.8%, depending upon the data source that you are using. We have not reached that, public sector. Even if we reach 6%, I don't think that the education financing of problems in education will be resolved. It is much beyond that, you know. So my point is that essentially we have tried to, over a period of development, the income levels and middle class in India have gone up. And as a result of that, we shifted the burden of pursuing education to the non-governmental sector. This has a lot of implications for quality of education that is provided, which Rohit touched upon in a different context, and also the employment opportunities which are provided. That is how inequalities are getting perpetuated. And I will stop by saying that the situation today is that even if we want to consider education as a public good, it is a public good without public support. Thank you.
Thank you, Burgess. Open the floor now. Jyotsna, would you like to come immediately? Since others are hesitant, maybe they want to follow you. Okay, no, that's okay. Yes.
That was fascinating and enlightening. I don't think I'd disagree with anything you said. I think it was very much to the point. But there is this ghost of the spectre, of this ogre of current Indian society lurking in the background. And so that prompts my question, not question, but request to you for a reflection. The state that you're describing as being desirable is based on all those moderates, the three moderates. But if your starting point, or the evolution that we've had in the past, has taken us to a point, which is now the starting point, let's say, is of such extreme differences that moderation of any kind is not around. And if there is moderation, it is within groups which between themselves are not moderate. Now this applies partly to the question, the process of thought. What is the nature of society? Are there one society or two or more? It also applies to what you said about the inequalities. But behind this is basically the market-driven principle is one of fundamental inequalities. And that's not compatible with any form of a public good with regard to education in any way. So the responsibility comes back. If we have those forms of inequality, and people can't service that need themselves, then what's the nature of society? Where does the obligation of society, which means the people who are not excluded, but the people who are included, what becomes their social obligation, if they are still members of the same society, to actually fund and finance a universal process? So I wanted a reflection from you on how do we start moving towards that moderation. It sounds very Gandhian in a way, and perhaps that's the kind of a thing which is, introspection is required, and behavioral change at the individual level and so on. All that is, I can accept that, but what are your thoughts on that? How do we move in that direction? I mean, we've lost the opportunity of teaching children the Constitution in schools 50 years ago, and in some way learning those values through the written word. Where are we now? So, reflection please. It's not a question, I'm sorry.
I just want to reiterate that that was a brilliant talk, and to ask the question in terms of the rise of demagogues, right? That is one of the conclusions and the warning against it. One of the key things we assume is that in schools or in the process of education, something like freedom of speech as a value is taught and is seen as something to be protected. This is taught, for example, very heavily in American schools, yeah? And anytime there is any infringement on that, everyone is up in arms. At the same time, you do have the emergence of a demagogue like Trump, right? So despite the fact that you have very different values that are being taught in schools, like in India versus in America, you still have the same risk emerging. So the question is why? Then what would be the role of values in schooling systems, right, to protect democracy?
One more question and then we can. Yeah, it's. Is that okay? Then two more.
Thank you, Rohit. That was, I enjoyed every minute, and I also liked the counter that we got from that end. I think that there's a certain silence that we have in our system. For example, you talked about the benevolent, moderate, self-restraining human as what we want to achieve through the process of education. And if I look at those measures, then most of us are not educated, even those who are most highly qualified, right, certified, who've gone to the best educational so-called institutions, have not learned this. I'm not talking only about those who haven't gone to school. I'm talking about those who have gone to the best institutions as well, who might not even know how to talk to a female colleague, right? I think the silence is about we not talking about the bad stuff, talking about caste, talking about religion, talking about gender, talking about our constitution, talking about the fact that we are not really democratic in our homes, in our ways of being with each other. And this silence that we seem to want to maintain is, to me, a very disturbing part. It's not just about who will pay for education, etc. But we need something that really counters this hegemonic silence. And that doesn't necessarily have to come from the school. It really has to come from another space, and school has to endorse it and protect it and amplify it. But we seem to have lost that of what are we actually trying to create as a society. And I think the last question really throws you when you've seen communities where schools are creating critical thinkers, argumentative children, so to speak, and we still have the rise of the Trumps in those situations. So that makes it even much more complex here, that we have the masses of people who are not taught critical thinking, who are not trained to be this benevolent human dignity embodiments. Then we seem to think that small organizations like yours, mine, who are doing this, alternatives and creating these alternative experiments, working with a few people, trying to create this wonderfully articulate, critical thinking young people and young children, we can't have the answers to this. I think there's a lot of expectation that some small civil society independent organizations will get some money, some people from somewhere and do some magic. It can't happen. We need something much more fundamental. Thank you.
This will be the last question, and then I have a question. Yours will be the last question. You showed your hand.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your remarks as well. I was actually thinking the public good argument, one reason why we are trying to look at it is because who has to finance education. That is one of the major reasons why we examine whether education must be public good or not. The way the discourse has been built, we still haven't made any major breakthroughs in the way it has worked. So I was probably thinking of other ways of articulations of education as a public good. And interestingly, when we go back to Dr. Ambedkar and all, there is some sort of an articulation where he puts the expenditure on education must at least be equivalent to the income that the state receives through the excise departments. In the sense, the morality question he puts in between, where the spending on education must always be much greater than what the state being promoting in one sense immoral space. So I think if we can challenge our own selves with the ideas of how we articulate education as a public good through other thinkings as well, maybe we'll be able to reach out to a lot of people and convince the general public towards the need of it. That was one. And one aspect that I was thinking for that came up in the discussions in the questionnaire session was critical thinking and rise of demagogues. Dr. Manish Jain was speaking yesterday elsewhere. He was making a distinction between critical thinking and critical pedagogy, where critical thinking gives us various perspectives and approach to question already existing narratives. But is it rooted in social justice is what makes critical thinking and critical pedagogy different, is what Dr. Manish Jain was arguing. So I think if we think on these lines, maybe we have some cues we could work forward with.
I was not counting on countering Varghese, but no. I'm saying I would like to counter. That's what I'm saying. So I was not counting on countering. That's all. But anyway, leave that out. Yes, I agree with most of the economic part of the argument. But it seems to me that there are certain things in the society which perhaps we have to take into consideration other aspects as well, and the ideals and values and continuation of certain traditions and achieving certain aspirations in the society, they themselves, it seems, that push the society in a certain direction. And what mechanism could be there, one has to think about it. But at the same time, I'd also say that the way I was talking of education was neither about knowledge being public good or the institution as being public good. I was saying this opportunity for every single individual to develop their rationality, benevolence, and self-restraint and will, or in Scheffler's terms, independence of thought guided by reason and human and towards human dignity, developing the opportunity to develop these capabilities should be freely available to every citizen. So here we are, this is what education is, this is what the crux of education is. So when we say making education a public good, the issue is not admission into Delhi University as a public good, but at least a certain level which the democratic society agrees. At this moment we have agreed to the elementary education. Therefore, for elementary education, this opportunity is unhinderedly available to every single citizen. Would-be citizen, every single child. That's what I meant. So therefore, this is not an issue of either knowledge being public good or the institutions being public good. The opportunity to get one's educated, that's what I was talking about. Acceptable, oh yes. You see, the quality is built into moderate rationality and all that. So yes, that's absolutely, I mean, that was the argument I was trying to this. I think that definitely the enrollment and school-going children have phenomenally increased now. Even in the poor rural villages, actually more children go to the private schools than to the government schools. That is true. But why has that happened? It's a very, very complex question. I am a villager. I go to my village every month, at least 2-3 days. The main thing is pressure on the land. They do not know what their children will do if they don't get educated. That's one of the, earlier in my generation, this pressure was not there. I can become a farmer. Now that opportunity is no more there. So, there are, I'm just pointing out one thing, there are several other reasons of this nature, not the Indian economic policies alone. Reasons are somewhere else, it seems to me. Now, coming to the extreme difference, and you see, I agree with you that first of all, I do not think that our education has served democracy very well. Whatever could be the reasons, Maybe we didn't have enough resources, maybe our planning was not great, maybe our understanding of education and educational processes and how values and capabilities develop in human beings, there could be 1,001 reasons. Today I couldn't go into that, but it seems to me that our education didn't serve the democracy too well. The other thing is that since our education did not serve, therefore education does not serve. That I would find a little bit of problematic unless something else is suggested that this will serve. So that's a bit of a problem. We have to do that. I do agree the kind of hint that was in your question, that education is a responsibility of the society. I consider actually state as an organ of the society fashioned for fulfilling certain roles. I don't think, it never comes in my mind state as the master of the society or an oppressor. It always comes as a tool fashioned by the, or not exactly a tool, a vyavastha fashioned by the society to do certain purposes. And I think it could be funded through the state. But also let's try to remember that we had a very, very robust tradition, particularly in Shekhawati and other areas of Rajasthan, where these people, industrialists, opened free schools in their villages in hundreds. So the well-to-do citizens of the society can contribute to good education. I also believe that even economists, they make this argument that public good actually can also be provided through private means. Even they agree on that. Therefore, I do believe that the people who are in a fortunate situation of helping the society, if they understand the argument. Now, why it is beneficial to everyone? We don't have time, and Shyam will stop me, so I'll give one or two simple examples. I do believe that you would like to have a neighbor as someone who is moderately rational, moderately self-restrained, and benevolent people, rather than a rude, arrogant people as your neighbor. So try to think of all our neighbors throughout the country. I do believe that having certain qualities in people, certain desirable qualities in people, benefit the society in terms of its contribution as well as its organization, as well as its governance and everything else. So from that point of view. Now this is very interesting that Trump as a demagogue, you see, I am not very well versed in American politics. And I'm also extremely skeptical about, theoretically these terms are fine, but who is a demagogue and who is not, to me, requires a lot more information systematically analyzed. I'm not saying Trump is not a demagogue. All I'm saying is, which one is a bigger one between Trump and Biden? At this moment, I don't have enough information to pronounce on that. So, but coming back more seriously to it, that simply means that education alone cannot do everything. Education can contribute. That's the big mistake we actually often do, that we think that if something could be solved through education, then education alone will do everything. No. Education contributes like several other things in the society. Also, I do not know whether freedom of speech, etc., in American schools are actually taken rationally seriously. Because I have read in last 2 years at least 5 or 6 articles when certain professors in their classroom challenged certain fashionable theories, including this flexibility of biological sex, and they were terminated. Where is the freedom of speech in that kind of mahol? This is more like freedom to speak according to the fashion. And universities are the biggest places for this, including our own. So I'm not sure about that. Role of schools in developing these qualities, and I do not know whether I can say anything more about it. about we need something much bigger than just these either small attempts or, partly I already said that education alone cannot fix everything, so several other things would be required. But personally, if you ask me, since I am a teacher, and that's perhaps the only thing I know, so therefore I am serving my own purpose actually, but it seems to me that education can contribute if we think a little bit more carefully about the school setting, curriculum, pedagogy, and the training of teachers can reasonably contribute. Alone cannot solve the problem, but can reasonably contribute. I do have small examples of small schools where children actually question the norms in their small areas, in the family or in the village, and change certain small things. So let's not think of changing the Indian democracy suddenly in half an hour, but millions of children changing within the family smaller things, and cumulative effect of that. And it seems that up to a certain extent, this seems to be possible. Yes, I am making an argument of the state should be responsible. How it arranges is a different issue. Critical thinking and critical pedagogy, I am not very comfortable with the comparison. One is a process and another is an achievement, and there are category problems in comparing these two. I was also not talking of critical thinking. I was talking of development of rationality, development of reason, which is a much bigger thing than this tiny critical thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. I'm aware that there are questions still, as you said, lurking in the bag, but that's okay. At least it's a yes, surely, and it certainly flagged some important questions and issues. Restricting to school, just school education, one of the major problems that we are facing is actually increasing homogeneity within classes, and instead of diversity being contained in a single institution, single class, now we are diversity in terms of the kind of institutions that each segments will go, which means that relative homogeneity within classroom and general diversity contained by diverse kind of institutions. In such a setting, after all, moderation and tolerance and everything is best practiced when there is diversity around. When there is no diversity around, then I think it's a bit like morality being practiced within the cloisters of a convent. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was a really enriching session. So I request everyone to proceed for a short tea break. We will assemble again here around 11:55. Thank you.